Okay.
You look weird without glasses.
Shut up.
Entitled, self-centered, lazy, these are just a few of the words used to describe individuals born between the 1980s and the 2000s, also known as Generation Y or the millennials. Although this is the case, these negative personality traits could eventually be converted in a positive light and be used to see society and industry in a different way. As a member of this generation, I can definitely vouch for the difference in personality between people my age and people born in the 1970s, who were part of the last large generation called Generation X. In the next few minutes, I'll explain why Generation Y has garnered this bad name for themselves, what can be done to help solve this epidemic, and finally, how these personality traits will eventually help revolutionize industry and society as a whole. Let's start off with the main problem: narcissism. Now, what is narcissism? Narcissistic personality disorder involves a preoccupation with self and how one is perceived by others. As you can see in this picture, the selfie syndrome is how narcissism is often described, because people become obsessed with themselves. Generation Y is the most narcissistic and entitled generation of the modern era. Tweng and Campbell wrote a paper called The Narcissism Epidemic, in which they described how narcissism personality traits rose just as fast as obesity since the 1980s. In 2006, 1/4 of the student population had standard narcissistic traits, and 1/10 of Americans in their 20s have narcissistic personality disorder. This could be due to what Dr. Linda Sapadin describes as a runaway inflation of speech. It is no longer acceptable to be average. A B is a C, and a C is the new F. A girl's no longer pretty, she's drop dead gorgeous. And when someone does not receive affirmation for their average work, they blame others rather than try to improve themselves. David McCullough Jr. said in a commencement speech last year that we as Americans have come to love accolades far more than genuine achievement. It has come to be seen as the point. Kids nowadays are more likely to take the pathway that involves the least amount of work and results in the most amount of praise. For example, people nowadays are more concerned with getting more likes on Instagram rather than actually enjoying what they're doing. Still, Generation Y does have something to offer to this world. Technology is growing every 6 months, so it is important to think about goals in short term. Bruce Tulgren wrote in his book, Not Everyone Gets a Trophy, How to Manage Generation Y, that short term is the key to relevance. Kids nowadays are concerned with staying hip and cool, and although that may seem negative, it is actually great inspiration for innovation, and it's the reason that a new iPhone comes out every 6 months. Joel Stein wrote in an article for Time Magazine, in which he explains how different roles in the workforce are changing. More and more young entrepreneurs are starting small businesses. As you can see from this chart, compared to 17.6 million small businesses in 2002, that number has risen to 22.5 million in 2011, in about a span of 10 years. So, these small businesses are now competing against large corporations, and there's no longer a need for a hierarchical or boss role. However, for these small businesses to succeed, the owner must possess confidence. Generation Y as a whole does possess this confidence. However, their inability to take criticism makes it come off as narcissism. So as you can see from these examples, the qualities of Generation Y must be nurtured in order to assure a positive outcome. For example, as a result of the changing societal roles that I mentioned earlier, today's workforce is far less loyal than it used to be. A person is more likely to switch professions if it is self-serving. They also have less work ethic because they believe that they have no room for improvement. And as for the internet, it can make or break you. Christine Hensler wrote in an article for the Huffington Post that everything you do stays online. Something as small as inability to work with others could blow up on social media. With Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Vine, anything like that could ruin someone's reputation and hinder their ability to get a job or even get into a school. Instead, the internet should be used to combine creativity and the ability for worldwide self-promotion. For example, someone could take a photograph or make a video on YouTube and anyone in the world can see it. This sort of flattening of the world should be utilized by Generation Y to help change the way people perceive them. But this is only the beginning of change. Entitlement is still rampant. This can only change if narcissism is converted to confidence, and if self-centeredness can be a gateway towards promotion. Technology can be used to help aid in this transition, however, it must be used correctly. The negative personality traits of today's generation could be turned positive, but if they don't, they could lead to the downfall of society. In the end, if they are converted into something positive, they could lead to an intellectual revolution that could rival the likes of the Renaissance. But in order for the intellectuals to rise, the older generation must help nurture the younger, and the younger generation must take the advice of those who came before us. To end, I'd like to say a quote by Leo Tolstoy, the famous author of War and Peace. He said that everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. So Generation Y should take heed, because societal change can only be catalyzed by individual change. Thank you.